Oh, hi! This week, I'm making a project for me, baby! It's not because anyone requested a certain style bag, I just kind of decided to invent a thing because I was very inspired this past weekend. I went to a couple local artist markets and I did buy a couple things from my pal Shane. His shop is called Shane's Goods, I'll link in the description. He had these incredible bags that were made with waxed canvas, and that's a material I've always wanted to try to mess around with. And wouldn't you know it, I had completely forgotten that my fairy god Cheryl sent me waxed canvas and waterproof canvas to play around with for this exact purpose, just to like learn how to use it and what I like and don't like about it. But it's always been in my like special fabric stash. Often does not feel accessible to me. I have to be like making something for someone else in order to use any of the good fabric. But wouldn't you know it, I'm starting to overcome these self-inflicted hurdles because therapy. And of course the first thing I thought of when I saw this blue color was, I gotta make a TARDIS bag. Am I predictable? Absolutely yes, there will be no further questions. So yeah, this is a waterproof canvas that looks like normal duck canvas, what have you, on the outside, but has this like plasticky layer on the underside. Should help protect the things that go in this bag. I picked kind of a weird size I don't see very often, but I just need a good spot to put my phone, put my wallet, and has a little extra room so if I have a receipt or dog cookies or something, I can also stuff that in there. So just if I'm going to sit with friends out somewhere, I don't want a huge backpack, but it's too much to juggle if I, God forbid, am wearing a skirt like I am today that doesn't have pockets. I just want to have everything in just one little stash. I don't like having my phone and my keys and my wallet all as separate things. So yes, if you would like to learn how to make this bag, stick around and I'll show you how I went about it. And yes, there was a vinyl mishap. I still love how this came out, and it's just shinier now where the finish on the vinyl before was more of a matte type thing. But, you know, smartphones are honkers nowadays, so that's gonna fit there perfect. And I boxed out the corners on the bottom to kind of 3D-ify it a little bit. I'm super pleased. Here's what you need. First off, more coffee. Always. But as far as actual materials, I used this waxed canvas, not waxed canvas, waterproof canvas. I think the waxed canvas is also waterproof. I got some lining fabric. That also is one of the special fabrics that I don't often let myself use. It's the exploding TARDIS fabric I bought years ago. Never touch unless someone requests something out of it, like some of the face masks that I put together this past year. That, you know what, just for self-care reasons, I am done making face masks. I can't do it anymore. I also got another fabric. I wouldn't necessarily go with the same type of plasticky vinyl if you're going to use the heat transfer vinyl on the vinyl. I should have known better, but I also wanted to test things out. Sure could have done it on a piece of scrap, but here we are. Just any kind of black fabric should work for the flappy bit. Ideally, another type of waterproof canvas for the top, but that's not the part I'm worried about. It's the bottom part of bags that I worry about getting wet. I also used an old strap I had laying around and heat transfer vinyl and some Velcro. Then matching thread, scissors, pins, sewing machine, and a good live stream to have on in the background. So the size I decided on for my pieces to get cut out were 8 inches by 10. I was working within the parameters of the scrappy pieces of the canvas that I had, but obviously you can make this whatever size you want. I will make notes of all the measurements I used for my bag and put that up for free on my Patreon. I have lots of pattern access up there where like pretty much every bag I've put together and a gathered skirt, and I'm sure there's some other stuff, all has the breakdown and actual numbers I used for everything on my Patreon. Just look for free pattern. And yet you don't have to donate to have access to it. It's just a good little hub to hold on to all of those things. And it's because of all my rad patrons that I'm able to put that stuff up for free, but I'll yell about them more later at the end of the video. So to start, I traced out my template on the canvas. Then I marked the halfway point on the template, so 5 inches up from the bottom, and cut out this like half size black vinyl piece. Then I roughly cut out a similar size piece of this just like scrap canvas I had laying around. It's actually from a cut off piece of a pant leg when I was hemming some pants for someone. Then I finally pressed out all the fabric because I should have done that before I started cutting things. And then I finally grabbed my good scissors that I hadn't been using for most of the project so far for some reason. And I traced and cut 2 lining pieces. So in total I had 2 outer pieces, 2 lining pieces, the top fabric for the flap and the lining fabric for the flap. Then I grabbed this strap. I was originally going to include the hardware, but then I decided to just cut the ends off, strap into the bag instead of having like separate loops and attaching the rings to it. I did save the rings to set aside for a future project because I am physically incapable of throwing things away. Also, bag hardware is fucking expensive, so of course I'm going to hang on to this. Then I had debated how to go about the closure for this, but I thought Velcro would be the most utilitarian option, like thinking about when and how I'm going to use this bag, I want a quick like open and close. For the actual construction of the pieces, I took the black vinyl half flap and the lining piece for it, sewed it right sides together around 3 edges, but I did leave the top completely open. I also made a point to do a wider seam allowance on this. At the end, it needs to just be a little bit narrower. Then I trimmed all the excess of the lining piece down, as well as trimmed the seam allowance down. I cut the corners, and then I flipped everything right sides out. And of course, it's like super floppy and wonky, so I just did a row of top stitching around all 4 edges to get everything to lay nice and flat. Then I attached the Velcro through both layers. It wouldn't have shown any stitching on the outside of the flap if I had attached it to the lining, but that seemed less sturdy, if that makes sense. I like when Velcro goes through all the layers and there's not like a random gaping between the outer shell and the lining when I'm trying to open a bag. But because the thread was easy to match to the black vinyl piece, then I wasn't worried about that showing. God forbid someone knows that I sewed this bag together and didn't just use magic. Then it was time to make the main part of the bag, so I stitched the 2 lining pieces right sides together everywhere but the top section. I did end up unpicking the bottom seam of the lining to flip everything right side out because I was going to do a different tactic, but obviously you can skip the unpicking step I'm going to do later on if you just leave a gap in the bottom of the lining enough to flip the bag right side out, not inside out, right side out. Basically, if you're better at thinking ahead than I am, you will do this step in the correct order. I again did a wider seam allowance on the lining because that's going to fit inside the outer shell, so it can be a little bit smaller so it's not puffing out everywhere and getting all bulky and puckery. Then I trimmed the bottom corners of both layers and then I boxed them out. So I laid the side and bottom seam flat to make this little triangle. I measured up 3/4 of an inch. If you want it to be wider, you just go up further. And I did a straight line across that. Then I trimmed off the excess of that seam allowance there just so it would lay a little flatter inside. And this is the difference between boxing out that corner and then just leaving that corner flat and not making it more 3-dimensional. You can take or leave this part, but you can also take or leave literally everything I'm saying right now. This is why these are called making chats and not tutorials, because I'm just sharing how I went about the thing. So yes, once I trimmed those, I went to put the layers inside of each other, and I will link up here to the way I made a tote bag because I finished that differently and I left the gap at the top stitching step, but rather than confuse you and try to explain what I didn't do here, just go check out the card if you want to learn a different technique as far as attaching a lining into an outer shell of a bag like this. This is just where I realized, yep, should have left a gap in the lining, stopped what I was doing, unpicked that bottom seam. So then I had my lining right side out and the outer shell inside out. I stuffed them so they were right sides together. Then it was a bit of a sandwich layering game. So I had to tuck the finished edges of the black flap, meaning Velcro bits, down inside the bag, right sides together with the blue fabric, so that the wrong side, that lining side, was touching the exploding TARDIS fabric. Then I took the strap and tucked that between the black flap and the blue fabric. So it's between the 2 outermost layers. Then I clipped those in place because there's no way a pin was going to survive going through all these layers. And I tried to make a point to line up the side seams really well. And then I just very carefully stitched around the entire thing. Then thankfully, I had just enough room with the gap in the lining. This is the hard part about having a narrower bag, is there's just less room to work with. So birthing the bag was quite a process because there's a lot of stiff fabric involved and like the vinyl is thick, but we eventually got there. And then it was just a matter of restitching the gap in the bottom of the lining. And then the finished bag was inside out. So it was just tucking the lining back into the outer shell. And again, it's kind of like floppy and wonky and doesn't want to lay flat, so I did a round of top stitching around the very edge of the blue shell and the lining and just like made sure everything laid nice and flat. So that looks so much cleaner and it's going to help the flap like stay sticking out. Then I was able to position the Velcro for the outer shell pieces. I just folded the flap down, then I just tucked a ruler under the flap so that the edge of the ruler was lining up with the bottom of the Velcro pieces on the flap. Then I just marked a couple spots so that I could line up the other side of the Velcro to the outer shell of the bag. And again, I stitched through the outer shell and the lining just because I think that's a more durable way to do it, and just did a little bit of top stitching. Then obviously if you're not adding any like words or decorations to this, you can stop here and you've got a simple little mini messenger bag. But I decided I wanted to add the police public call box text to the black flap. That was like the entire point of this bag. And things went a little hinky. I figured there might be an issue applying the heat you need to get the heat transfer vinyl to stick would cause a problem with the vinyl fabric that is also very plasticky and like can't take much heat before melting. But again, it just made this shiny and like it just looks wrinkly or whatever, but I'm not upset about how the bag came out. It just gives the vinyl a different finish, and you know, at least now I know for sure for future. Again, should have done a test swatch to see what exactly would happen, but I had confidence it would still be usable in the end. But you know me, I have a bit of a rogue shoot first, ask questions later mentality with some of my crafting. When I'm making stuff for myself, I never would have done this if it was for someone else. But I also got to use a lot of nice things that I don't often let myself use, and that feels really, really nice. And as I said, these are making chats. I share the process with you, so when things go to shit a little bit or just go awry perhaps, you're seeing the full picture of how everything goes, where things aren't exactly perfect all the time in my sewing room. And I want to help make crafting less intimidating, because I so often see people comment, I could never make that, when there's a very professionally done, every step is exactly flawless type tutorials on YouTube. And I like when you get to see the mess ups and the troubleshooting and like, okay, I run into an obstacle, how do we work around this and still continue making the thing we want to be making? Or maybe this is just my excuse for how I mess up all the time. When I see other people do it, I find it wildly relatable. So hopefully this helps, and if nothing else, I got a cool bag that I'm going to immediately start using out of it, and that's not nothing. Me getting something out of doing a thing is worthwhile, where I don't always view things that way, and I'm trying to shift my perspective on things where I am worth putting the time and skill into myself just because I want to, just for fun. I know I shared the process with you, so it did turn into a work project, but this bag wouldn't have existed if I didn't feel like making myself a thing. So yeah, this feels really nice. And legitimately, I wouldn't have the time or resources available to put things like this together, both time-wise, financially on my end, and like because I've been gifted things by my patrons who make all of this happen. I'm so thankful for all of you that you care this hard about what I'm doing and just letting me get better at my favorite thing and make fun stuff and not always get it 100% right every time. And to everyone, I'm so thankful that you're all here, and it certainly makes things brighter for me on a weekly basis getting to hang out with y'all. So thank you for gifting that to me. All right, we took a nosedive deep in the cheese, so I'm gonna end it there. A certain grump is waking up from his nap, so that means it's time for lunch and taking a little snuggle break. Bert and I will see you back here with another video next Friday. Thank you so much for hanging out, because I use everything.